Hello everybody, I saw some really interesting videos recently, one from Weapon Collector, which is just a frequently asked question video, but he got asked if he's seen a ghost and anything like that, and he told some creepy stories. And Jack Stryker also at the same time sort of did a really similar video where he talked about, like a paranormal experience he had, and I thought, they're quite creepy, and I thought you might want to know mine, because there's one I've had a few experiences, but there's one that's got a lot more substance to it and a lot more history, so I'll go into that one because I think it's the most interesting one. And if people find this video interesting, I might do some of the other shorter stories in different videos. So, obviously, as you know now, I'm self-employed. I'm obviously looking to try and hopefully find a part-time job I actually want to do, as well as sort of just doing my YouTube stuff and other stuff, but for the most part, I just work for myself now. Whereas for the last 5.5 years, I worked in an Argos store. And if you're not in the UK and you don't know what an Argos store is, it's basically like where you go into a shop and they have a very small actual shop, but they've got a big catalogue. Well, they used to do it by catalogues, now it's more electronic. And basically, you could stock check what they had in. They have like a big warehouse behind all the stores. So then somebody who works in the warehouse, you pay for it, they bring out your item. So it's a bit like ordering directly from a warehouse, but you're actually waiting in there for them to pick it up. So it's like, you get it within 5 minutes as opposed to waiting a day or two if you order something online. Because of things like Amazon, places like Argos aren't as popular as they were, but going back a while ago, they were quite interesting, all novelty concepts that you could have a store that was, a big warehouse. So rather than wasting floor space for stuff, they had a, big warehouse. So, like I said, I live in Oxford, and Oxford is quite an interesting place. I don't actually live in Oxford itself, but, obviously I used to commute in there to work, and because Oxford's quite old, or very old, there's lots and lots of ghost stories attached to Oxford. And this is one where it was sort of haunting we had at work, and it went on for, like the entire time I was there. And it's one that, almost everybody knows a bit about in the store who work there. But, it was one of those things, like I said, because I was there 5.5 years roughly, this whole thing goes over a long period. So it's not one where, you can actually... The reason, like I was saying, it's weird with like haunting type stories, because everybody always says, like almost quite appropriately, like, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you get out there? I wouldn't have stayed in a haunted house, or things like that. Whereas if you're doing it for your job and it's over a long period of time, you don't think much about the things as they happen, but over time, it gets a bit more sinister when you think of all the things that had happened. So obviously, like I said, we would sort of say that some weeks I'd be there and you'd get, nothing would happen in a week, and then you could have another week where a few weird things would happen. So what I'm going to do is try and, do it as a rough timeline, not with dates, but, like things that happened and, all stuff like that. So, one of the weird things was, like, where we had our stockroom, it was one that was downstairs. Like, most stores have a stockroom out the back if they're, like, built onto a retail park. Ours, because it's in a city, had to be underground. So it was quite, deep underground. In the summer it was nice being under there, because the room was always a lot colder than everywhere else. So, when it's 30 degrees outside Celsius, downstairs it's 20 degrees Celsius or something like that. So, it's a really old dingy sort of basement, sort of big cellar type thing that was used as our stockroom. You can tell bits of it were older than other bits, because in some places there was old brickwork, and others, it was all concrete. So it's one of those old, stock rooms that is probably a lot older than the shops built on top of it. And obviously, as I was saying, you'll be aware that Oxford has a really long history. If you don't know much about Oxford, just Google it, and then you'll find like pages and pages of Wikipedia stuff about the history of it. But it's an old famous university city for the people who don't know much about it, because a lot of this will play into probably some of the stuff. And everything I'm going to say, is as true as far as I'm aware of it, with what people have told me who experienced things I didn't experience, and as much as we put facts together, when stuff happened, rather than that. So everything I say in this video is true as far as I'm aware it's true. So basically, when I worked there, you'd have random incidents where you'd be down there and you definitely feel like you're being watched, and you'd never be able to put your finger on it. You'd like look around, nobody was there, carry on, nothing would happen for the rest of the day or the shift or whatever, so you wouldn't think too much of it. You'd have incidents quite frequently where you'd hear a noise, you'd go to investigate it, because often you were working, alone down in the stockroom. There was, absolutely nothing going on there at all. So you think that's weird, you put it down to the building and everything else like that. But, you know, lots and lots of people down there had experiences of some sort or the other. And lots of people, we'd think, you know, you'd almost tease people saying, oh, it's a ghost, but you didn't really believe it for the most part. And, you know, I had a couple of weird incidents, but I didn't think too much of them at the time, because how I looked at it, although I kind of believe in a lot of paranormal stuff, I'm also trying to look at it from a sceptical sort of rational angle, where I think, what's the most common explanation, you know, like an Occam's razor type thing, what could be the explanation to this, and then I'll do it based on that, you know, not based on it's a ghost sort of right off. So the sort of things we'd think to start with would be, you know, the sort of thing I'd think of a lot would be, because the lighting's not brilliant down there, you're down there for long hours, you're getting quite bored working, you'd probably think it's your mind playing tricks on you. That's what I generally suggest. Like, you know, the lighting's not great, so you can't see as clearly as you could in a well-lit place. You know, there's a thing where people get, like, their senses play tricks on them if they've been, you know, bored and sitting in a dark room for ages. So I thought it might be a bit of that. And I got headaches quite a lot in there, and I thought one of the reasons for that might be, you know, there's electromagnetic radiation or something like that down there. I actually have a thing that you can use to check wiring and walls, and I took that down there, but weirdly I didn't get many results from that, so I brushed off as that. But, you know, I thought it was one of those things that there could be some sort of, you know, electrical energy or something down there that, you know, gave you headaches or made you hallucinate very slightly on long shifts, you know, and you didn't think much of it other than that. But what started happening was, you know, more and more people I worked with at one point, you know, had seen things or were getting creeped out. Like, some people didn't even want to go down there, you know, they were afraid of ghosts or whatever, they didn't want to work on their own down there. And the weird thing is because we had so much activity in a short space of time at one point, you know, one of the things was, one of my jobs I had to do was go around and check where stock was. So, you know, when you put away a delivery, you assign stock to a location using a headset. When it's sold, you know, it gets assigned by a computer from that location for you to pick it and give it to a customer. So if it wasn't in a location, you had a problem, because it's called like an out of stock refund, and obviously you don't want that because it's bad if a customer comes in to buy something you say you've got in stock and then you look for it and can't find it. So what we had to do quite often is check that stock was in its location, the right quantities and everything like that. And one of the weird things was, I think it was around Christmas one year, I had to keep contacting management because there was lots of items that weren't in the right places, and we thought to start with, you know, it was somebody messing about with stock, which is obviously not something you allow to happen in a proper store. You fire somebody if they're doing that. You either suspect theft, or you suspect somebody is trying to inconvenience the store, you know, to get a joke out of it. So I was investigating that for a while, and we could never pin it on anybody, and it stopped after a while. But, you know, it was like, when you think back at it now, you think that's like poltergeist stuff, where stuff had just, you know, moved, it was in places it couldn't be in, sometimes it was on really high shelves and it didn't look like somebody had moved a ladder to put it up there. Lots of weird stuff. So anyway, as I was saying, because I'm getting sidetracked, I decided, and a couple of other people decided, to look into some of the history, you know, on Google. And near where the store was, there was a place that used to be an old burial pit. So literally built on, you know, the ancient Indian burial ground thing. It was a bit like that, where there was probably at least less than 10 yards, I'd say, from one of the walls of the warehouse downstairs. They had, supposedly, I think it was in medieval times, it was either a big communal grave for poor people, or it was during one of the plagues, either the Black Plague or the Great Plague or Black Death. They had a big burial pit, which they, I think, threw plague victims in before just mass burying them because of the amount of people dying. So it was either one or the other. But then that kind of was really creepy, because this is when lots of people actually started associating it more with ghosts, because up until that point a lot of people, you know, or they thought it was weird and creepy, had sceptical attitudes to what was going on down there. You know, every time they heard a noise, every time something moved, you'd always put it down to something like that. But then once you learn that, you know, like less than 10 yards away or so from one of the walls of the stockroom, where sometimes you had more activity than other areas, that you had an old burial pit, you start going, something's not quite right. So, as of what I saw as in like the creepiest experiences, I'd say there was one time, this one's one of the ones I remember the most, is I was down an aisle sorting some stuff out, and there was another person down, you know, another aisle. And at one point I heard some really heavy boots go clomp, 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 you know, down the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time, but what I did think was really weird is the stockroom has like a really big fire door, and it's one which, you know, a really creaky, squeaky hinge. It goes, you know, every time somebody opened and closed the door. So you always knew if somebody was opening, you know, coming in or coming out of the stockroom, because you could hear the door move. And I didn't hear the door move, so I thought, that's odd. So I looked around the stockroom, you know, to see if anybody else was down there, and this girl who I worked with at the time wasn't down there, so weird. So I mentioned it later on to my manager, and she said, you know, she went home at 4 o'clock, and I thought, shit, because, you know, I was down, that must have been 5 PM or something, so there was nobody actually down there, because the door hadn't opened or closed, but, you know, I'd heard, you know, clear as day, like somebody literally down the next aisle to me where I couldn't see them because they were stuck on the shelves between me and them. So if that's you down one aisle, it's like somebody on the next aisle, like 2 yards away from you basically, but through shelving racking you could hear, you know, heavy boots on the tile floor. And it wasn't just like, you know, one thing, it was like clop, 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 like somebody actually walking from one place to another. So that was really weird. There was loads of times I had phantom smells where you'd randomly be down part of the stockroom and you'd get a really strong smell of either incense or like a very strong perfume. And although we sold perfume, we didn't sell incense, but we sold some perfumes like, you know, celebrity fragrance type ones. And those you'd, if a bottle leaked, you'd have to damage it off or whatever. And you'd always know if one of those had leaked, but they were normally always kept in one sort of area of the stockroom, and often you'd get this smell in, you know, areas that were nowhere near where they were kept, and there was no products on the shelves that would have made any weird smells. So that was always creepy, because sometimes it was, you know, an overpowering smell, and then 10 minutes later the smell was totally gone. You know, always in one spot. I experienced hot and cold spots a bit, where you'd go down somewhere and one area would feel cold or warmer than everywhere else, even if you had the central heating on. And, you know, the stockroom's meant to be all roughly similar temperature, except if you're right next to a fire door, where obviously it's a bit colder, but yeah, that was always really weird. And there's been a couple of times when I was down there where you'd catch something out the corner of your eye. Like, you were walking down an aisle, you'd glance sort of sideways and you'd see a silhouette of somebody in the corner, and then you look, you know, because you're like, somebody, you shouldn't be down here, you know, because it's a secure area. Nobody's there. And I said some of it could essentially be your brain playing tricks, and it can be sort of a confirmation bias thing that once you think it's haunted, you experience more stuff. But as I said, I swear some of this stuff is totally stuff I've experienced and was really weird. And I said, as for when people say, why didn't you run away screaming and like refuse to work there, because, you know, it was my job. And said all this stuff is stretched out over like 5.5 years of being there, so it's not like all these things happened, you know, like one after the other, day in, day out, like, you know, if it was some sort of Amityville horror type thing. It was, you know, like often you'd go weeks with nothing happening, and a small thing would happen, you just sort of brush it off and not think about it. But as I said, like, you know, you'd constantly, when there was activity, get noises that didn't have an explanation. Like, I think I've heard muffled voices down there as well, and you think, is it because sometimes you could stand in certain places in the stockroom, and you could hear from the street level, you know, voices coming through the bricks if people were shouting at each other or whatever. But, you know, occasionally you could find no explanation for it, and it was really weird stuff like that. So as I said, I haven't worked there in a while. I don't know if they've had any other weird activity. I'll have to ask next time I see somebody who worked there, but yeah, it was all genuinely, the more you think about it, pretty creepy. But as I said, it was stretched out over a long period, and once I found out there was a plague burial pit or something like that in one of the, like, you know, a few yards from one of the walls where I saw a silhouette a couple of times, it makes you go, ooh. So, yeah, that's my story. Hopefully with it coming up to Halloween, some people might find this interesting, but there you go.